I've always believed that a neighborhood should feel like home, not like a prison with walls made of petty rules. But when I moved into this HOA community, I quickly learned that belief and reality were two very different things. You see, I wasn't just dealing with neighbors. I was dealing with enforcers, the kind of people who thought their clipboard and rulebook made them kings and queens of the street. And nothing revealed their hypocrisy faster than the battle over my dog. It started small, as these things often do. I had just moved into the community with my golden retriever, Max. Max isn't just a dog, he's family. He's loyal, gentle, and more than that, he helps me in ways no HOA contract could ever understand. But within days of unpacking, I got my first taste of the HOA's bite. One morning, I stepped outside to find a bright yellow envelope taped to my door. The kind that makes your stomach drop before you even read it. Inside was a violation notice. According to the HOA, dogs of Max's size weren't allowed in the community. I remember standing there, reading that line over and over, anger rising in my chest. Max wasn't causing problems. He wasn't aggressive. He wasn't destructive. He was a dog who liked to nap in the sun and chase tennis balls in the yard. But apparently, that was too much for the HOA. I thought maybe it was a mistake. So I called them. I expected a polite conversation, maybe some understanding. Instead, I got a cold-clipped response from the HOA president herself, a woman named Karen, yes, her real name. She said, "We have rules here. Your dog doesn't meet our standards. You'll need to rehome him, or we'll pursue fines." Rehome. Him, Max, the dog who had been with me through my darkest days. I hung up, shaking with rage. They weren't just attacking my dog. They were attacking my family. And I wasn't about to roll over and let them win. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with the HOA contract spread out in front of me. I read every word, every clause, every tiny piece of fine print. Hours passed, and my eyes burned from the strain, but then I found it. A single line buried in the exceptions section. It read, "Service animals are exempt from restrictions, regardless of breed or size." A slow smile spread across my face. Because here's the thing, they had no idea who they were messing with. Max was already a trained emotional support animal. I had documentation. I had the right to keep him. But as I sat there staring at that line in the contract, a wild idea began to take root. If the HOA wanted to play games with rules, then I'd play too. Only I'd play smarter. The next morning, I sent Karen a copy of Max's certification. I expected her to back down immediately, but instead, she doubled down. She wrote back saying emotional support animals weren't real service animals. She even claimed the contract was vague and subject to interpretation. Interpretation. No. This wasn't interpretation. This was clear, black and white writing. And I wasn't just going to prove it to her. I was going to shove it in her face so hard she'd never forget. I went back to the contract, and the more I read it, the more I realized they had written themselves into a corner. The exemption didn't say a service animal. It said service animals, plural, which meant technically there was no limit. 1, 2, 3, 5. If I wanted, I could fill my house with service animals. And there was nothing Karen or her clipboard could do to stop me. The idea was too perfect to ignore. So I did it. I applied for and adopted 4 more dogs each, trained and certified as service animals. They weren't just pets, they each had a purpose. And together, they became my team, my family, and my ultimate revenge against the HOA. When the neighbors saw me walking down the street with all 5 dogs, their jaws practically hit the pavement. Karen nearly choked when she spotted us. Stormed over, red in the face, sputtering about excessive animals and community standards. But I didn't flinch. I pulled out the contract, highlighted the exemption, and said, "Read it for yourself." The look on her face when she realized she had no legal ground to stand on. Priceless. But this was only the beginning, because having 5 service animals wasn't just about sticking it to the HOA. It became a statement, a symbol. Neighbors started cheering me on. People who had once stayed silent about the HOA's bullying now had someone to rally behind. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for all of us. But here's the thing about power. People like Karen never give it up easily. And as much as I had won this battle, I knew the war was far from over. What I didn't realize then was just how far she'd go to try and take my dogs down. And that's when things really got ugly. I don't think I'll ever forget the first time I realized just how unprepared the HOA really was for what I was about to put them through. After my initial meeting with the board, where Karen had tried to humiliate me in front of everyone, I went home, dug up the full HOA bylaws, and started combing through every page. Buried in the fine print, there it was in plain English. Service animals cannot be prohibited in the community, regardless of breed, size, or number. I remember laughing to myself. The same Karen who had puffed up her chest and said, "We have strict rules, here no dogs allowed," had been presiding over an HOA. Actually protected my right to have one, and not just one. The wording was so broad that it didn't even place a numerical restriction. 1 service animal, 5 service animals, it made no difference. That tiny clause, hidden among dozens of dry, boring paragraphs, was about to become my ultimate weapon. The very next morning, sat down at my kitchen table, pulled out my laptop, and started drafting a polite but firm letter to the board. "Dear HOA Board," I began, "I'd like to remind you of Section 14, Subsection 3 of the HOA bylaws, which clearly states, residents are entitled to have service animals within the community. The HOA cannot deny or restrict this right. Please consider this my formal notification that I intend to exercise this right." I didn't stop there. I printed off copies, highlighted the section, and attached a note that said, "Since the HOA prides itself on fairness, I trust that this clause will be respected." I hand-delivered it to the HOA Dropbox 2 days later. Karen showed up on my doorstep. She didn't even knock politely. She jabbed her finger into the doorbell over and over until I opened the door. "You think you're clever, don't you?" she snapped, shoving the paper I had written back into my chest. "Service animals? Really? You're going to pretend your little mutt is a service animal?" I raised my eyebrows. "Pretend he is one," she scoffed. "Oh, please. I've seen you. That dog just lays around. Service animals are highly trained. You're abusing the system." I leaned against the doorframe, calm as ever. "Actually, Karen, under the Americans with Disabilities Act, you're not allowed to demand proof or certifications the way you're implying. The HOA bylaws defer to that law, which means you can't harass me about it. The only question you're legally allowed to ask is whether my dog is a service animal required because of a disability. And the answer to that is yes." Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. She wasn't expecting me to know my rights. She thought I was just another pushover homeowner who would cave the moment she applied pressure. Instead, she stomped away, muttering something about calling an emergency board meeting. That's when I got my next idea. If one service dog was enough to drive her mad, imagine what 5 would do the following week. I adopted 4 more service animals, each trained, each legitimate, and each perfectly within my rights. My house became the most dog-friendly home in the entire neighborhood, and my backyard echoed with playful barks. You should have seen the look on Karen's face the day she drove past and saw me walking all 5 dogs at once. Leashes in both hands, every single one wearing a bright red service animal vest. She nearly ran off the road, But it wasn't just about revenge. It was about making a statement. If she was going to try to strip away my rights, then I was going to lean into those rights harder than she ever imagined. Of course, it didn't take long for the HOA to escalate. Notices began piling up in my mailbox. Noise complaints, improper use of property, violation of HOA aesthetics. All of them flimsy. All of them nonsense. One of them actually accused me of ruining the community's image by parading dogs up and down the street. I laughed so hard reading that one that I taped it to my fridge like a piece of artwork. But behind the humor, I could see where this was headed. They weren't going to stop. Karen wasn't just mad. She was humiliated. She had made a public spectacle of me at that meeting, and now everyone could see she was the one in the wrong. She needed to win. And people like Karen don't fight fair when they're desperate. So, I prepared myself. I started keeping records of every letter they sent, every conversation I had with her or the board, every phone call. I knew they'd eventually cross a line so blatant that I'd have the evidence to crush them legally if it came to that, and I didn't have to wait long at the next board meeting. Karen stood up in front of the crowd and announced, "We are considering amending the bylaws to put a strict cap on the number of animals a homeowner can have. 5 dogs is absolutely ridiculous, and it makes this community look like a kennel, not a respectable neighborhood." The murmurs in the crowd told me everything. Some people agreed with her, others didn't. A few even shot me sympathetic glances. That was my moment to stand up. I cleared my throat, held up a copy of the bylaws, and said, loudly enough for everyone, "To hear Karen, you can't just rewrite the bylaws to trample on federal law. The ADA says service animals are protected. If you try to enforce a new rule that conflicts with that, the HOA is opening itself up to a massive lawsuit. And just so you know, I've been documenting every violation of my rights since this nonsense began." The room went silent. Karen's face turned beet red. She clenched her fists at her sides, her nails digging into her palms. "This isn't over," she hissed, and she was right. It wasn't, because what she didn't know was that I had already contacted an attorney. A good one. And together, we were about to flip the entire HOA upside down. The next morning, I woke up to find 3 HOA letters stuffed under my door. Not in the mailbox, not delivered formally. Just shoved there, like some kind of childish intimidation tactic. Each one was stamped urgent in bold red. I ticked them up, one by one, and skimmed them over coffee. Letter 1 demanded I immediately remove all animals that are not approved by the HOA. Letter 2 accused me of harboring multiple non-compliant pets in direct violation of community guidelines. And Letter 3, the most dramatic of them all, threatened that if I didn't comply within 72 hours, I'd face maximum fines, escalating penalties, and potential legal action. I laughed out loud. They still didn't get it, because I wasn't harboring pets. I was legally allowed to have service animals. And according to the ADA and the HOA's own outdated contract, they couldn't do a single thing about it. But I also realized something else. This wasn't about rules. This wasn't about dogs. This was about control. Karen and her little army of board members couldn't stand that I had found a loophole, a legal protected one that they couldn't override. So now they were trying to scare me into submission. Instead of replying, I decided to give them a little show. That evening, I took all 5 of my service dogs, Thor, Luna, Daisy, Max, and Shadow, on a walk around the neighborhood. We went right past the HOA clubhouse, where I knew the board was holding their weekly meeting. I could practically feel the curtains twitching as they stared out, mouths open, furious but powerless. Each dog had its vest on, each properly leashed, each calm and well-trained. I wasn't breaking a single rule, and that's when something interesting happened. Neighbors started coming out of their houses, First, just to peek, but then they came closer. Kids ran up, excited to pet the dogs. Elderly neighbors smiled, asking about them, and little by little, I noticed something shift. See, the HOA had always framed themselves as the voice of the community. But in reality, they were just the loudest bullies with clipboards. The actual neighbors, they loved seeing. The dogs, they thought it was funny that the HOA was losing control. Some even whispered to me that they were glad someone was standing up to them by the time we circled back home. I felt like I'd won the first real battle. Of course, Karen wasn't going to let that slide. The next day, I got a knock on the door. Not just one person. The entire HOA board stood there, arms crossed, clipboards in hand like they were about to stage an intervention. Karen was in front, face tight, voice sharp. "This has gone far enough," she snapped. "You are making a mockery of this community. We have rules for a reason. 5 dogs. This is outrageous, and we will not tolerate it." I leaned against the doorframe, calm as ever. "Well, Karen," I said, "then maybe you should have read your own bylaws more carefully before coming after me, because, legally, there's nothing you can do." Her face turned red, but before she could speak, I added, "And just so you know, the neighbors don't seem to mind. In fact, some of them actually like the dogs. Maybe the HOA isn't as representative of the community as you claim." That hit a nerve. The board members exchanged nervous glances. Karen pointed her finger at me like some kind of cartoon. "Villain, you're going to regret this," she hissed. "We will take this as far as it needs to go." And then they left, stomping down the walkway like a defeated marching band. But I wasn't naive. I knew what was coming. This wasn't just about fines anymore. Karen was going to escalate this into a legal war. And if she thought I was going to back down, she had no idea what she was in for, because I had one more ace up my sleeve, and I was saving it for when the HOA tried their final move. After the second service animal arrived, it became clear that the HOA wasn't going to just sit quietly. At first, it was small things. Neighbors would glare at me when I walked past. Karen made it a point to stand in her driveway whenever I took my dogs out, and some HOA board members suddenly started patrolling the street like they were security guards. But then, they escalated. One morning, I received a letter stuffed into my mailbox. It wasn't an official notice, but a typed-out note with no signature. It said, "This neighborhood is no place for your circus of animals. Get rid of them, or we'll get rid of you." I'll admit it rattled me. Not because I was scared, but because it confirmed what I already knew. This wasn't just about a rule. This was personal now. The HOA board had taken my insistence on following the law as a direct challenge to their authority. And in a way, it was. I showed the note to my lawyer, and he advised me to document everything. So, I bought a camera system and installed it around my property. Every strange car that slowed down near my home, every person who walked by and lingered too long, every interaction, neat, was all caught on video. That's when I noticed something interesting. Karen, our infamous HOA president, had a dog herself. And not just a dog, but one she openly paraded around the neighborhood. Here's the kicker. Her dog wasn't registered as a service animal. According to the very contract she waved around at me, pets were not allowed. Service animals were the only exception. The hypocrisy was so thick, I could taste it. The next HOA meeting was where things boiled over. Karen stood up in front of everyone, waving a clipboard. "This resident," she said, pointing directly at me, "has decided to abuse a loophole. He's brought in multiple animals under the guise of service dogs. This is clearly against the spirit of our community rules. We cannot allow it." I raised my hand calmly. "May I respond?" She sneered. "Go ahead." So, I walked to the front of the room with a stack of papers in my hand. I had copies of the HOA contract highlighted in yellow. I also had a printed photo of Karen walking her dog in the neighborhood, leash in hand. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, holding up the contract. "Our own HOA bylaws state that service animals are allowed without limitation. The law agrees." With that, nowhere does it say I'm restricted to 1, 2, or even 5 service animals. What I have done is fully legal, fully within our contract, and backed by federal law. I paused, then held up the photo. Meanwhile, our HOA president here has been walking a pet around for months. A pet that is not registered as a service animal. By the very rules she is trying to use against me, she is in violation. The room erupted, some gasped. Others murmured to each other. Karen turned beet red, slamming her clipboard on the table. "That's different," she barked. I am the HOA president, and that's when someone else in the crowd shouted, "Yeah, and you think the rules don't apply to you?" It was a turning point. The room's energy shifted. Suddenly, I wasn't the villain. She was. But Karen wasn't done. She left that meeting fuming, and a week later, I received an official notice this time. The HOA was filing for arbitration, claiming I was creating a public nuisance. Their argument, that having multiple service animals disrupted the peaceful character of the community. I knew they didn't have a leg to stand on legally. But the arbitration process meant I'd have to prepare for battle. My lawyer was confident we'd win, but he also warned me, they're hoping to wear you down. They think if they make it miserable enough, you'll give in. But I wasn't going anywhere, so instead of backing down, I doubled down. I began the process of adopting a third service animal, this one trained for mobility assistance. Not only would it help me, but it would also send a very clear message. The harder they pushed, the stronger I'd push back. And it was working. Some of the quieter neighbors started approaching me, whispering their support. One older woman told me, "Karen's been bullying people for years. You're the first person to stand up to her, and we're all watching." It hit me then this wasn't just about me anymore. This was about the entire neighborhood. If I let the HOA steamroll me, they'd keep steamrolling everyone else. But if I held firm, maybe I could finally put an end to Karen's reign of terror. What I didn't realize was that the real twist was coming. Because while I was preparing my case, Karen was preparing something far darker. Something that would shake the entire HOA to its core. By the time the 5th dog padded into my life, tails wagging like a small army of furry rebels, the HOA was no longer just annoyed. They were unraveling. I had effectively turned their pristine, overregulated little kingdom into a minefield of wagging tails, paw prints, and service vests they could not legally touch. Word had spread beyond the neighborhood. Local news caught wind of my situation after a reporter got hold of the HOA's ridiculous violation letters. The headline practically wrote itself. HOA bans service dogs, homeowner outsmarts them with 5. Suddenly, my quiet standoff became a community-wide spectacle. People stopped me in grocery store aisles, clapping me on the shoulder, saying, "Good for you, man." HOAs have too much power. Of course, the board didn't like this newfound attention. Karen, their president, doubled down, drafting yet another violation notice claiming that 5 dogs were creating a nuisance with barking and paw traffic. But here's the thing, they didn't bark at night. They didn't dig up yards, and every single one was impeccably trained. My dogs had better manners than most of the HOA board members. One evening, as I sat on the porch watching all 5 of them lounging peacefully on the grass, Karen stormed across the street with a folder thick as a legal textbook. She slapped it against her palm like a judge with a gavel. "This is harassment," she snapped, voice shrill enough to send the birds scattering from the trees. "You're abusing a loophole in the bylaws. 5. No one needs that many service animals." I smiled. Slow and steady, the kind of smile that had been forged after months of this nonsense. Well, according to federal law and your own HOA contract, I'm fully within my rights. Each of these dogs is a service animal, task-trained, certified, and documented. Would you like me to read the clause back to you again? She sputtered, flipping through her papers, but I knew she had nothing. I had studied that contract so thoroughly I could quote it in my sleep. The real twist came when one of my neighbors, a quiet retired veteran named Mike, stepped out onto his lawn. He raised his hand, holding his own dog's leash, and said, "Actually, I've been thinking of getting a service dog too, maybe two." Another neighbor chimed in, then another. Suddenly, it wasn't just me. Mothers began realizing they had the right to push back against the HOA's ridiculousness. Karen looked around and saw her power slipping away, one wagging tail at a time. By the time the next board meeting rolled around, it wasn't just me in the room. It was me, my 5 dogs, and half the neighborhood standing in solidarity. I didn't even need to raise my voice. My dog sat calmly at my feet while I leaned forward and said, "You thought this was about me. But it's about all of us. You've ruled with fear, fines, and empty threats long enough. The contract protects us, not just you. And now we know it." The silence that followed was deafening. Karen's face flushed red, her knuckles white as she gripped her papers. But there was nothing left to fight. The board voted to rescind the violation letters. They had no choice. And for the first time in years, the homeowners left that meeting, smiling, shoulders lighter, because someone had finally stood up to the bullies. Life after that was calmer, but better. My 5 service dogs became local celebrities, often featured in neighborhood events. Children loved them, neighbors adored them, and I finally felt free. The moral: sometimes the best way to fight unfair power isn't by bending or breaking, but by knowing the rules better than those who try to use them against you. And when you stand up, others find the courage to stand too. So yes, I started with 1 dog. They tried to scare me into giving up, but in the end, I gained. Not just 5 loyal companions, I gained my community back. And that's the story of how my HOA tried to strip away my rights, only to learn that the land a pack of determined service dogs were stronger than their empty threats. Remember, the next time someone tells you you can't, check the rules. Sometimes the biggest victories come from simply knowing where you stand and refusing to move.